Story 1. The Hitchhiker on Highway 287. I was driving from Dallas to Amarillo on Highway 287 last summer when I picked up the hitchhiker who changed my life forever. It was around 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night in July. The highway was completely empty, just me and the endless stretch of asphalt disappearing into the darkness. I'd been driving for 3 hours and wanted to reach Amarillo before midnight. That's when I saw her, a young woman standing on the side of the road, thumb out, looking for a ride. She was maybe 25 years old, with long blonde hair and wearing a white sundress. She looked clean and normal, not like the typical hitchhiker you'd expect to see on a deserted highway. I normally wouldn't pick up strangers, especially not at night. But something about her seemed different. She looked scared and vulnerable. I pulled over and rolled down the passenger window. "Need a ride?" I called out. She walked over and smiled. "Thank you so much. I've been waiting here for hours. My car broke down and my phone has no signal." I unlocked the door and she got in. Up close, I could see there was something sad about her eyes. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Amarillo," she said. "I have family there." Perfect. That was exactly where I was going. We drove in silence for a while. After about 30 minutes, she started talking. "Do you believe in second chances?" she asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" "Like, if you made a terrible mistake, do you think you could ever make it right?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was supposed to get married last weekend, but I got scared at the last minute and ran away, left him standing at the altar in front of everyone." "That's rough," I said. "But if you really love him, maybe you can work it out." She shook her head. "It's too late for that now. Way too late." Something about the way she said it made me look over at her. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The seatbelt was hanging loose, like it was passing right through her body. I could swear I could see the seat through her, like she was transparent. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking. She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I died that night," she said simply. "After I ran away from the wedding, I was driving to Amarillo to stay with my sister. I was crying so hard I couldn't see the road. I hit a tree about 5 miles back. My hands started trembling on the steering wheel. That was 3 years ago," she continued. "Every year on this date, I try to make the trip I never finished." The temperature in the car dropped suddenly. I could see my breath fogging in the air. "What's your name?" I whispered. "Sarah Mitchell. You can look it up when you get to town." She was becoming more transparent, fading like morning mist. "Will you do something for me?" she asked. I nodded. "When you get to Amarillo, find my sister's house. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I never stopped loving our family." But Sarah was already fading away. Within seconds, she was completely gone, leaving me alone with nothing but the lingering smell of flowers. I drove the rest of the way in shocked silence. When I got to town, I searched for Sarah Mitchell online. The newspaper article was from 3 years ago, exactly as she'd said. Sarah Mitchell, age 25, died in a single-car accident on Highway 287 after leaving her wedding ceremony. She was survived by her sister, Jennifer Mitchell, who lived on Oak Street. I found the house the next morning. Jennifer answered the door, and the resemblance to Sarah was unmistakable. I told her about my encounter. Instead of thinking I was crazy, she started crying. "She's tried to come home every year on the anniversary," Jennifer said. "Other drivers have called me, saying they picked up a hitchhiker who looked just like Sarah. Since that night, I've never driven Highway 287 after dark, and I've never picked up another hitchhiker. Some people are so consumed by guilt that not even death can stop them from trying to make amends." Story 2. The Ghost Town That Appears at Midnight. I was driving from Houston to El Paso on Interstate 10 when I took a wrong turn that led me to a town that shouldn't exist. It was my first cross-country road trip, and I'd been driving for about 6 hours when I decided to stop for gas and food. My GPS showed a small town called Cedar Falls about 10 miles off the highway. It looked like the perfect place to stretch my legs and grab a bite to eat. I took the exit and followed a 2-lane road through increasingly sparse countryside. No other cars, no houses, just scrubland and the occasional oil pump nodding slowly in the darkness. I was starting to think I'd made a mistake when I saw lights ahead. Streetlights, neon signs, the warm glow of a town settling in for the night. Cedar Falls looked like something from the 1950s. Main Street was lined with classic storefronts, a diner with chrome trim, a movie theater with a vintage marquee, a gas station with old-fashioned pumps. Everything was perfectly preserved. I pulled into the gas station and got out to fill up my tank. The attendant who came out was a middle-aged man in a clean uniform. "Welcome to Cedar Falls," he said. "Don't get many visitors this time of night." "Beautiful town," I replied. "I'm surprised I've never heard of it." He gave me a strange look. "Most folks haven't. We like to keep to ourselves." After filling up, I walked over to the diner. It was busy for such a small town. Nearly every booth was occupied. The waitress seated me at a corner booth. I ordered a burger and fries, and while I waited, I looked around at the other customers. There was something odd about them, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. They all looked normal. Men in suits, women in dresses, kids in clean clothes. But they all had this same expression, like they were performing in a play. Their smiles were too perfect, their conversations too quiet, and nobody seemed to age properly. The kids looked like miniature adults, and the adults looked ageless, like mannequins. My food arrived quickly, and it was delicious. Old-fashioned cooking, the kind you don't find anymore. I paid the check and decided to walk around town. Cedar Falls was immaculate. Every building was perfectly maintained, every street was clean, every lawn was perfectly trimmed. I stopped at the movie theater and looked at the marquee. The featured film was Rebel Without a Cause starring James Dean. The poster looked brand new. "Great picture," said a voice behind me. I turned around to see a teenage boy in a Letterman jacket, grinning at me. "You've seen it?" I asked. "Several times. Jimmy Dean's the best." Real shame what happened to him. Something about the way he said it made me uncomfortable. James Dean had died in 1955, over 60 years ago. But this kid was talking about him like it had just happened. I excused myself and walked back toward my car, but I got turned around. The streets that had seemed so straightforward before now twisted and looped in ways that didn't make sense. I asked a woman walking her dog for directions to the gas station. "Oh, honey," she said with that same perfect smile. "There's no need to leave tonight. Why don't you stay at the hotel? I really need to get back on the road," I insisted. Her smile faltered for just a moment, and I saw something flash in her eyes. Something cold and hungry. "Are you sure? Most people who visit Cedar Falls decide to stay permanently." I backed away from her and kept walking, trying to find my way back to where I'd parked. But every street I took led me deeper into the residential area. In one window, I saw a family sitting around a dinner table. They weren't eating or talking, just sitting there, staring straight ahead with those same mannequin smiles. That's when I realized what was wrong with everyone in town. None of them were breathing. Not one person I'd seen had taken a single breath. I started running. I ran through streets that seemed to shift and change around me, past houses where families of the dead sat in perfect tableau. The whole town was populated by corpses, playing out an eternal fantasy of 1950s American life. Finally, I saw my car ahead. I sprinted to it, jumped in, and peeled out of the gas station lot. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror. The lights of Cedar Falls were fading, and within minutes, there was nothing behind me but darkness. I drove straight back to Interstate 10. When I reached the highway, I looked for the exit I'd taken to reach Cedar Falls. It wasn't there. I checked my GPS, my maps, everything. There was no exit, no road, and definitely no town called Cedar Falls anywhere near that stretch of highway. The next day, I researched the area online. I found old newspaper articles from 1957 about a small town called Cedar Falls that had been evacuated due to a chemical plant explosion. The entire population, about 300 people, had died from toxic gas exposure. The town was declared uninhabitable and was eventually bulldozed, but on certain nights, Cedar Falls comes back. The dead return to their perfect little town, playing out their eternal fantasy of the American dream. And sometimes, they try to convince the living to stay and join them forever. Story 3. The Phantom Semi on Interstate 35. I was driving north on Interstate 35 from San Antonio to Austin when I encountered the phantom semi-truck that haunts that stretch of highway. It was around 2 a.m. on a Friday night in March. I'd been working late and decided to drive to Austin to visit friends for the weekend. The highway was mostly empty except for the occasional trucker. I was somewhere between San Marcos and Austin when I first noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. Big, bright headlights, the kind you see on 18-wheelers. They were maybe half a mile behind me, gaining ground slowly but steadily. I wasn't worried at first. Truckers often drive faster than regular cars at night. I figured he'd pass me in a few minutes. But the truck never passed me. It stayed exactly the same distance behind me, matching my speed perfectly. When I sped up to 75 miles, it sped up. When I slowed down to 65, it slowed down too. After about 10 minutes, I started to get nervous. I tried changing lanes to let the truck pass, but it changed lanes too, staying directly behind me. I couldn't see the truck itself, just those two massive headlights cutting through the darkness. But I could hear it, the deep rumble of a diesel engine, the hiss of air brakes. I decided to exit the highway and see what the truck would do. There was a rest stop coming up, so I took the exit. The truck followed me. The rest stop was completely empty. I pulled into a parking space and turned off my engine. The truck pulled in behind me and stopped about 50 feet away. Its engine kept running, and those headlights stayed focused on my car. I sat there for several minutes, waiting. The truck didn't move. No one got out. It just sat there, engine idling, watching me. Finally, I got out of my car and walked toward the truck, hoping to talk to the driver. As I got closer, I could see it was an old semi, probably from the 1980s. The cab was painted dark blue with some kind of logo on the door. But when I got within about 20 feet, I realized something that made my blood freeze. There was no one in the driver's seat. The cab was empty. No driver. Nobody at all. But the engine was running. The lights were on, and I could hear the radio playing faintly. Some old country song. I backed away slowly. This couldn't be happening. That's when I heard the voice. It came from inside the cab, even though I could clearly see it was empty. A man's voice, rough and tired. "You shouldn't be out here alone, son." The voice was definitely coming from the truck. "Who are you?" I called out. "Name's Billy Richardson. Been driving this route for 37 years. "Where are you? I can't see you." "I'm right here in my cab, same as always. Been sitting in this seat since 1987. That was over 30 years ago. Had an accident on this stretch of highway," Billy continued. "Jackknifed in the rain, rolled the rig, died on impact. But I never stopped driving. I could see my breath fogging in the cold air, even though it was a warm March night. Every night, I drive this route, looking for other drivers who might need help. These highways can be dangerous." "What kind of help?" "Sometimes people break down. Sometimes they fall asleep at the wheel. I keep an eye out, make sure everyone gets where they're going safely." Despite the impossibility of the situation, I found Billy's presence oddly comforting. "You were driving pretty late," he said. "Seemed like you might be getting tired. Thought I'd follow you for a while." He was right. I had been getting tired, and the empty highway was hypnotic. "Thank you," I said. "Just doing my job. You be careful now. And if you ever see my headlights behind you again, Don't be scared. It just means I'm looking out for you." The engine noise began to fade, and the headlights dimmed. Within moments, the truck was gone completely. I got back in my car and continued to Austin. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I felt like I was being watched over. The next day, I researched Billy Richardson online. I found a newspaper article from 1987 about a truck driver who died in an accident on Interstate 35. Billy Richardson, age 45, had been driving for 15 years when his semi jackknifed during a thunderstorm. But according to dozens of reports over the years, Billy never stopped making his runs. Drivers have reported seeing his phantom semi on Interstate 35, always watching over travelers. Some ghosts are vengeful. Some are lost. But Billy Richardson is different. He's still doing what he loved most: taking care of people on the open road. Story 4. The Vanishing Motel on Highway 83. I was driving from McAllen to Abilene on Highway 83 when I stopped at a motel that disappeared by morning. It was the middle of August, one of the hottest summers on record in Texas. My air conditioning had broken down somewhere near Laredo, and I was driving with the windows down, sweating through my clothes. By the time I reached the middle of nowhere between Crystal City and Uvalde, I was exhausted. It was almost midnight, and I'd been driving for 12 hours straight. I needed to stop and get some sleep. That's when I saw the neon sign glowing in the distance: Desert Rose Motel, vacancy, air conditioning. The motel looked like something from the 1960s, but it was well maintained. A long, single-story building with about 20 rooms. The office was at one end, with a neon sign that buzzed softly in the night air. I pulled into the parking lot and noticed there were only a few other cars there. The office was small and cramped, with wood paneling on the walls and old travel brochures scattered on a small table. Behind the counter sat an elderly man reading a newspaper. "Need a room for the night?" he asked, without looking up. "Yes, please, something with good air conditioning." He smiled and handed me a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag. "Room 14. Best AC in the place. That'll be $40. I paid cash and walked to my room. It was exactly what I needed: clean, cool, and quiet. The air conditioner was humming perfectly. I took a long, cold shower and collapsed onto the bed. Within minutes, I was sound asleep. I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I walked past the window, I glanced outside and noticed something strange. There were more cars in the parking lot now. A lot more. Every space was filled, and some cars were parked in odd places, like they'd been abandoned in a hurry. But the cars were all old, really old. I saw a 1950s Chevrolet, a 1960s Ford Mustang, a 1970s Cadillac. All of them looked like they'd been sitting there for decades, covered in dust and showing signs of rust and decay. I looked closer and realized something that made my skin crawl. All the license plates were from different decades, some from the 1960s, some from the 1970s and 1980s. None of them were from this century. I grabbed my room key and walked outside to get a better look. The motel looked different in the middle of the night. The paint was peeling, the neon sign was flickering, and some of the room doors were hanging open. Through the open doors, I could see inside some of the other rooms. They were occupied, but the people inside weren't moving. They were lying on their beds, fully dressed, perfectly still, too still. I walked closer to one of the rooms and peered inside. A middle-aged man in a 1970s suit was lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling. His skin was gray and waxy, and I couldn't see his chest rising and falling. He was dead. They were all dead. I backed away and looked around the parking lot with new eyes. Every car belonged to someone who had stopped at the Desert Rose Motel and never left. Decades worth of travelers who thought they were just stopping for the night. I ran back to my room and grabbed my keys and wallet. I had to get out of there. But as I reached for the door handle, I heard a voice behind me. "Leaving so soon?" I turned around to see the elderly desk clerk standing in my room, but he looked different now. His skin was pale and translucent, and his eyes were completely black. Most guests find our accommodations so comfortable, they decide to stay permanently, he said with a smile that revealed teeth like yellowed bone. "I need to go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh no, I'm afraid that's not possible. Once you check in, you become part of our family. Forever." I tried to push past him, but he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. His touch was ice cold, and I could feel my energy being drained away. "Don't fight it," he whispered. "Soon you'll be just like the others. Peaceful, quiet, no more worries." But I wasn't ready to give up. I pulled away from him and ran toward the door. He tried to grab me again, but I was younger and faster. I burst out of the room and sprinted to my car. The engine turned over on the first try, and I peeled out of the parking lot, gravel flying behind me. In my rearview mirror, I could see the desk clerk standing in the doorway, watching me leave. Even from a distance, I could see his black eyes reflecting the neon light. I drove for 2 hours straight without stopping. When the sun came up, I decided to drive back and see if the Desert Rose Motel was still there. But when I reached the spot where the motel had been, there was nothing there. Just empty desert, stretching to the horizon. No building, no parking lot, no neon sign. I stopped and got out of my car, walking around the area where I was sure the motel had been. There were no signs that any building had ever existed there, but in the sand, I found something that proved I hadn't imagined it all. A plastic room key tag shaped like a diamond, with Desert Rose Motel, room 14 printed on it in faded letters. I still have that key tag. It's a reminder that some places exist between reality and nightmare, preying on tired travelers who just need a place to rest, and that sometimes checking out isn't an option. Story 5. The Crying Woman of Devil's Backbone. I was driving the Devil's Backbone road between Wimberley and Blanco when I encountered La Llorona, the crying woman who haunts the rivers and streams of Texas. Devil's Backbone is one of the most scenic drives in Texas, winding through the hill country with beautiful views of valleys and limestone cliffs. But it's also one of the most dangerous roads in the state, with sharp curves and steep drop-offs that have claimed dozens of lives over the years. I was making the drive on a foggy October night, returning from a photography trip in the hill country. I'd spent the day taking pictures of old barns and abandoned homesteads, and I was running later than I'd planned. The fog was getting thicker as I drove, reducing visibility to maybe 50 feet. I had to slow down to about 20 miles per hour. That's when I heard the crying. It started faintly, just a soft sobbing sound that I thought might be the wind. But as I continued driving, it got louder and more distinct. Someone was crying hysterically, the kind of desperate wailing that comes from unbearable grief. I rolled down my windows to hear better. The crying was definitely real, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere ahead of me on the road. I drove slowly toward the sound, thinking maybe someone had been in an accident and needed help. Then I saw her. A woman in a white dress was standing in the middle of the road about 30 feet ahead of me. She had long, dark hair that hung down to her waist, and she was holding her hands to her face, sobbing uncontrollably. I stopped the car and got out, leaving the engine running and the headlights pointed toward her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I called out. "Do you need help?" She looked up at me, and I saw the most heartbreaking face I'd ever encountered. She was beautiful but devastated, with tears streaming down her cheeks and an expression of absolute despair. "Mis niños," she said in Spanish, "have you seen my children?" Her voice carried an otherworldly quality, like an echo from a deep canyon. "Your children? What do they look like? When did you see them last?" She took a step toward me, and I noticed something strange. Her white dress was soaking wet, like she'd just climbed out of a river. Water was dripping from her hair and clothes, forming puddles on the asphalt. "I lost them in the water," she said, switching to English with a heavy accent. "I was so angry, so hurt. I did something terrible, and now they're gone forever." As she got closer, I could see more details that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were completely black, with no whites or pupils visible, and when she moved, she seemed to glide rather than walk. "Where did you lose them?" I asked, backing slowly toward my car. "In the river," she wailed. "I threw them in the river, and now I cannot find them. I search every night, but they are lost to me forever." The temperature around me dropped suddenly. I could see my breath in the air, and frost began forming on my car's windshield. That's when I realized who I was talking to. La Llorona, the Weeping Woman, one of the most famous ghosts in Mexican and southwestern folklore. According to legend, La Llorona was a woman who drowned her children in a fit of rage or madness, then killed herself from grief. She was condemned to wander forever, searching for her lost children. "You need to leave this place," I said, trying to sound calm. "Your children aren't here." She shook her head violently. "They are somewhere. I hear them calling for me. I must find them." She reached out toward me with hands that looked more like claws. Her fingernails were long and sharp, and her skin was wrinkled and waterlogged. "Help me find them," she pleaded. "You have a car. We can search the riverbanks together." I knew from the stories that La Llorona sometimes tried to lure people to their deaths, either by drowning them or by driving them mad with grief. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," I said, reaching for my car door. Her expression changed instantly from pleading to furious. Her mouth opened wider than humanly possible, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Her voice became a shriek that cut through the night air. "If you will not help me find my children, then you will take their place." She lunged toward me with inhuman speed. I dove into my car and slammed the door just as her claws scraped against the window. She began pounding on the glass with such force that I was sure it would shatter. I threw the car into drive and floored the accelerator. As I pulled away, I could see her in my rearview mirror, chasing after the car. She was moving impossibly fast, keeping up with me even as I reached 30 miles per hour. Her wailing filled the air, a sound so mournful and terrifying that it seemed to penetrate my bones. I drove as fast as I dared on the foggy, winding road. Every time I looked in my mirrors, she was still there, sometimes running behind the car, sometimes appearing to float above the road. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I reached the end of Devil's Backbone and turned onto Highway 281. As soon as I left that cursed stretch of road, La Llorona vanished. I didn't stop driving until I reached San Antonio. I spent the rest of the night in a hotel, too shaken to sleep. The next day, I researched the history of Devil's Backbone and found dozens of reports of La Llorona sightings over the years. Drivers had encountered her on foggy nights, always searching for her lost children. I also found news articles about accidents on that road. Several drivers had crashed their cars after swerving to avoid a woman in white standing in the road. Others had been found drowned in the creeks and rivers that run alongside the highway. La Llorona is still out there, wandering the back roads of Texas on misty nights, still searching for the children she destroyed in a moment of madness. If you ever find yourself driving through the Texas Hill Country on a foggy night and you hear the sound of a woman crying, don't stop to help. Keep driving and pray that she doesn't notice you, because some grief is so deep and so powerful that it transcends death itself. After hearing all of that, would you ever feel safe driving alone through Texas at night again? These stories come from real people who experienced encounters with the paranormal on Texas highways. The Lone Star State's vast distances and isolated roads seem to attract spirits who can't move on from their earthly traumas. Maybe it's the history of violence and tragedy that's soaked into Texas soil. Maybe it's the loneliness of those endless highways that calls to restless souls. Or maybe Texas is just a place where the boundary between our world and the next is thinner than elsewhere. Drop your own Texas road trip horror story in the comments. I might feature it in the next video. Which one of these stories scared you the most? Was it Sarah, the hitchhiker bride who never made it home? Billy Richardson, the guardian trucker? Or La Llorona, eternally searching for her lost children. Hit that subscribe button if you want more true horror stories from the darkest corners of America. Safe travels, if you can manage them.